In this session, we're going to talk about the basic allotment. Very important funding element, probably the most important funding element, because it's the starting point of your school funding. And we're going to, first of all, talk about what the basic allotment is. The statute doesn't really say the basic allotment is this or that. It's and in some people's mind, it's just a number to start with, and how big it is depends on how much pressure there is to raise it or how much money is available. But when it was first started, the conceptual part of what the basic allotment was supposed to be was that it was the cost, the minimum cost of providing an accredited basic program to a student that didn't have any special needs. They were just in the regular program, and they were in a district that was the least expensive district to operate. In other words, it's about as close as you could get to the basic funding level. And I put on screen a quote from an article that was written by Paul Colbert, a former state representative who was involved in the development of this concept when he was in the legislature. And there's an excellent article he wrote that's also listed there that's online. I would refer you to for more details about it. Now, just going back a few years to look at the history of the basic allotment. In 2009-10, that was the year in which the basic allotment was raised to $4,765. Before that, it was a lower amount. And that was done during the 2009 regular session. And since it was raised, then what is kind of typical is that it sits there instead of continuing to go up. And so it sat there through the 2012-13 school year. And in 13-14, which was the year after the district court reached a verdict, a bench decision. It wasn't a written verdict, formal verdict, but the Judge Dietz in the Texas Taxpayer and Student Fairness Coalition et al. Trial litigation, the legislature responded to that. That was done in February of 2013, which was in the first part of the legislative session, and the legislature came back and responded in a very appropriate way. And among a couple of other things, they raised the basic allotment to $4,950. And then they had a second step in the second year of the current biennium where it would go up to $5,040, and that's the basic allotment we have in place right now. Now, this goes back to how you look at things. If you go back to 12-13, which was the last year that the basic allotment was $4,765, and then you go through the two-step increases over the next 2 years, then what you have is a pretty significant increase over a 2-year period, 3 years, but 2 steps. And that's $275 increase, which is a significant amount of money. It was a good increase. And that amounts to 5.8%. So you could say, well, this increase was 5.8% in just 2 years, which should satisfy all needs. Well, you could also look to see that it's the same 5.8% increase over these 6 years, these 5 steps from 2009-10 to 2014-15. And so if you're looking at it over the 5 steps of 5 years of increase, then 5.8% isn't really that much money. It's pretty low. And sometimes when you don't keep up with what the basic allotment should be elevated to over time, you run into a situation where you do a substantial increase, but it's not that much when you're looking at the starting point to where you are instead of just the year before. Now, just to pick a number at random, and this is purely hypothetical, I chose 2% because most people would agree that a 2% increase in funding would not be exorbitant. Some would say, well, 2% really doesn't cover the cost of inflation and pay raises and so forth that you would give to your teachers and faculty, other members of the faculty. But 2% is something that is definitely defensible. So I started with the same $4,765, and in each subsequent year, that number there, $4,860, is 102% of the prior year's basic allotment, a 2% increase. And then in 2011-12, another 2% increase, and so on all the way down to 2014-15. And you can see that that's nearly twice the increase. If you had a 2% increase per year, that would be a 10.4% increase over the 5 years, just doing 2% every year and letting it compound. That would be probably a more appropriate funding level. So, what if you wanted to start at $4,765, which was the basic allotment in 2009-10, but you didn't want to get above the $5,040 that's in place now? Suppose you said that is the appropriate amount. But instead of just letting it hang at one level for those 4 years and then jumping it up for 2, what you did was you just did a percent increase every year that would get you to $5,040. And that number calculates out to be just a little bit more than 1%, just a little bit more than 1%. So if you started in 2009-10 at the 4,765 number and then added 1.0113%, then that would take you to that rounded to the nearest dollar, 4,819. Continue that process in each year, and you end up with 5,040. So it's still a 5.8% increase. It's still $275, but it was done a little bit each year. So what in effect was done was a little more than a 1% increase. But let's look at a chart of that. This blue line here is the gradual, a little bit more than 1% increase per year that started at the right amount that we did have in 2009-10 and ended at the amount we do have, the basic allotment we do have in 2014-15. So what you have in reality, though, was that it did not change, and then it went up a bunch, and then it went up another good step in that next year. Well, what the children were deprived of during that time is all of this money in between. That's money that the school district didn't get because there was no change in the basic allotment. Instead of having a steady increase that reflected inflation, you had stagnation for 4 years and then a big increase. And this is the money that the districts did not get over that period of time, as opposed to an annual small increase. Now, we have some important basic allotment points that I want to make before we go forward. If you were to go to the Texas Education Code, Section 42-101A, it would define what the basic allotment actually is. And the maximum basic allotment in statute is $4,065. Now, you'll notice I referred to it as the maximum basic allotment. It's because not every district gets that as their basic allotment. We'll talk about that a little later. But in appropriation, because in statute it says that through appropriation that a higher basic allotment can be adopted for the 14-15 school year, that was adopted. Well, since what is done in appropriation applies only to that budget biennium, what that means is that at the end of this current school year, that 5,040 goes away unless the legislature continues to adopt it or a higher number. If the legislature takes no action with regard to the basic allotment, then it reverts to the 4,765 number that we had prior to this biennium. And again, not all districts have $5,040 as their basic allotment. For many, it's quite a bit less. So this is how you calculate the basic allotment. It is the lesser of two calculations. It cannot be any higher than that. 5,040, that's the maximum basic allotment. But to determine the basic allotment for a district, what you do is you take the compressed tax rate and you multiply it by that maximum basic allotment. Now, the question may come up, well, what do you do about those Harris County districts that had a compressed tax rate of more than $1? Because obviously if you multiplied 1.09 or something by the 5,040, you're going to get a number that's bigger than 5,040. But the basic allotment cannot be higher than 5,040. So those districts, their basic allotment is 5,040. So the compressed tax rate and the basic allotment, the maximum basic allotment, go together to determine each district's basic allotment. And I have a couple of examples here of districts that are below $1. If a district's compressed tax rate was 95 cents, say, then you would take 95% of 5,040, and this number right here would be the basic allotment for that district. If a district was at $1.35 in 2005-06, when you took 2/3 of $1.35, that would compress to 90 cents. So they'd have a 90 cent compressed tax rate, so they take 90% of 5,040, 0.90, and their basic allotment would be this number here, 4,536. So you have a multitude of basic allotments. In fact, as you can see, this is a chart of all of them. They're as low as a bit above $3,200. There's about 3 districts down here in this area. Then it jumps up some to a little higher level. But these are the charts of basic allotments. Whenever you get to this point right here, those are the people that were compressed to $1 or more. Their basic allotment is the 5,040. And so everything to the right of this line, 5,040. Everything to the left is lower. And as you can see, there are nearly 500 districts that have a basic allotment that's less than 5,040. Now remember what a basic allotment is. It is the number that should be appropriate for all districts as the base. A child who is in the regular program and in the least expensive district, before you take into consideration any of the costs that are specific to the district or to children with special needs, this is the funding level. So it brings into question why you need to have nearly 500 different basic allotments when you should have one. That's something when the court case goes through, depending on what the Supreme Court does rule, that this needs to be addressed regardless, that we need to go to one basic allotment for all districts. There are 223 different basic allotments for the 1,019, and I want to go back just a bit. I misspoke when I was talking about there being nearly 500 basic allotment. Some of these districts that are in here have the same basic allotment. It's rounded off, and so you could have a district like district right there, and the one next to it or a couple next to it might have the same basic allotment. So it's not nearly 500 basic allotments. Instead, it's 223 different basic allotments. So when you should have 1. So there's your concept. It's supposed to be the minimum cost of an accredited education for a regular student in the least expensive district. And that should be 1 basic allotment, but we have many. In fact, they are broken down. M&O tax rates, this are ones that have been adopted today. This is not your compressed tax rates. These are your M&O tax rates. So some of those districts that had a compressed tax rate below $1 might be among those that are at $1.17. And then above $1.17 of those Harris County districts that are allowed to go above $1.17 because they have 17 cents on top of their compressed tax rate, which is above $1. 2 are actually above $1.17, and one's a little above $1.24, and one is a little below $1.24. And here's the range of M&O taxes that have been tax rates that have been adopted. From a low of a little bit more than 65 cents all the way up to nearly $1.25. And that concludes this session.